Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. Today, my guest is Andrew Seski. Andrew's from a company called NthRound, and we're going to talk today about communicating to investors and the tricky little problem that is these days. So, hello, Andrew.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me on.
So, Andrew, tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get to this position that you're working in NthRound?
So actually 2 years ago today, I joined NthRound, and we sought to try to solve some of the most complicated issues in the private markets. And some of the most complicated issues land on the CFO to try to solve. And it usually takes form in a couple of different ways. NthRound was originally focused on trying to provide unique liquidity solutions and also try to expand upon trying to create a culture of transparency by giving CFOs tools to be more communicative and streamline investor relations without taking away the personal aspect of managing those relationships. So while it's great to be communicative, it's also very challenging. It's also very painstaking. And the process is really manual. So we look to use just modern software to provide new investor portals to companies so that CFOs would have a new suite of technology to use and a more modern design to give shareholders a better experience and continue to cultivate those relationships, because we know that at the end of the day, who you work with often comes down to whether or not you enjoy working with those people. So we knew that from day one, and we tried to distill those life lessons into practical software tools.
Now, that's really interesting, because you tend to think of the CFO, well, number one tool is always going to be the Excel spreadsheet. We accountants just love hiding behind spreadsheets. But then you start talking about accounting systems, and you start talking about systems that will report numbers that aren't necessarily financial systems. But you're going in a completely different form of communication, aren't you? So
absolutely.
Tell me a little bit more about what this set of tools are, because frankly, I'd never come across anything quite in this sort of space before.
I couldn't characterize it better. I think of Excel as, if you can picture Atlas holding up the world, very, very strong. I see those spreadsheets as the backbone of the financial industry. NthRound's not trying to take away. I know that it would be a great struggle to try to rip away Excel from CFOs. What we're trying to do is mobilize some of that data, give it a little bit of life by creating things like a cap table that's easily sortable. Just really things that we've learned that over the course of all of our careers that are important. For example, having a dynamic cap table could just help you sort whales to minnows.
Cap table. What's a cap table, Andrew?
Simply just the ownership structure, right? So right. We're talking about a list of investors, shareholders, whether they're really all stakeholders. So they could be your employees if you're kind of a forward-thinking firm that made their employees owners, and more likely that you've got a handful of investors, or if it's very complicated, you have a lot of investors. So communicating with these different subsets of groups is maybe one of the most important roles within a company. So that dictates things like whether or not you have a really delighted shareholder and investor. And I think that most of your other guests on the podcast would probably agree with, if you have happy shareholders, your life is exceptionally easier than if you have unhappy shareholders. And what that means to us is access to information that's ready and a really easy and simple solution that's secure and at your fingertips. Whether it's you're driving and you're in a car and you want to flip open your phone to check a new update from your company, or if you're looking for a 4-year-old K1, we want to be able to provide all of that at a click of a button, so that you're not emailing the CFO because you know that within an hour they'd have to respond to that email. So that disrupts the day, and it doesn't really create a good communication channel. So we want to just provide all of these tools and make them look like they weren't designed at the advent of the internet. We've noticed that most of the existing software out there oriented towards CFO roles are really, they're mostly data vault or document vaults or data rooms. And while that's really practical, it's not what you'd like to deliver to a shareholder.
Fine, yeah. Give the shareholder something simple, something that allows him to see the key messages you want to give him, but also something that he can mine into to find those essential documents like the K1 that you mentioned. So to some extent, Andrew, we must be putting the company prospectus online into a portal.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there are definitely different levels of ways that you can utilize an NthRound platform. One of the ways I think about using the product is really more in terms of an audience view and an internal view. And maybe that'll help separate and kind of discuss the value of having a platform like ours in place. When I think about the audience view, I think about a very busy personal investor, and maybe it's an angel that was early in your startup, or maybe it's a large family office that it took place in one of your rounds. When that person decides that they are looking for information, they need something really clean, really beautiful to look at, and they want to feel good about their investment. And you want to light up the value of what that investment is, whether it's a price graph of transactions that they can see their equity appreciating, or if it's simply an update about how the company's growing or which direction they're taking. From the internal view, this is one of those things, and it's great that we're doing this over a podcast because it's a great example. It's something that you're putting out there for the world to see, right? But it's not just the world; it's some of the most important relationships within your business. So I don't know if you've come across this in your career, but sending out a shareholder update can offer really two huge error potentials of omission or commission by leaving people out or adding people who shouldn't be on that list. So simple solutions like in portal having a very easily sorted list of those investors, being able to separate them into cohorts and automating email flows. It seems like something that just should have already been made available to teams, but this is an anxiety driving event for most people, whether it's a CFO prepping and the CEO actually clicking send, or any scenario that would be just very stressful around investor relations. So we try to just take away some of that pressure by just giving updated, really kind of modern and innovative tools to try to solve some of these problems, because we know that addressing shareholder needs is one of the most important roles. And I think that need is becoming more placed or more regularly placed on the CFO, which may not be the most natural fit for the role.
Yeah, and we're probably getting into areas of why does gross CFO exist? Well, one of the things we're very definitely seeing, Andrew, is that the kind of breadth of skills that a CFO needs to have these days is huge. And there's no way that any one person can be expected to be rounded at absolutely everything. I think communication's one of those interesting ones that, well, you've got a guy who's used to be in the back office, used to be behind his favorite Excel spreadsheet. He's used to running the finance team, becomes CFO. Well, suddenly he's got to talk to customers, to suppliers, to investors, to shareholders, countless other stakeholders. He's got to be the right-hand man to the CEO. Now, suddenly he's got a whole new world to play in. So anything that helps him communicate better has to be a real bonus.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's really the key of NthRound. It's one of the few, I promise you that you can find 1,000 ways to manage payroll. There are countless accounting softwares and ERPs for planning and holding some of those macros that that you'd love to do in Excel. One of just the completely unmet needs is really just around investor communications. They have to be so tailored, so bespoke, and they're really challenging to do. So we wanted to give essentially the place where you're going to have I think about it in a way that's sort of like you'd be working on a math problem. You have your scratch sheet, right? You don't want to turn in that scratch sheet. Your investors aren't that interested in the way that your macro is designed, but they definitely need to be able to have that distilled data presented to them in a beautiful way, and that communicates really effectively, because it's going to be a quick look through and it all has to obviously check out. But there's really no software that is oriented to distill those same lessons. And our team is incredibly well versed in investor relations. So we're really, really fortunate that we've been able to create software around life lessons that, and truthfully, mistakes that we've all made. So that's really where all of this began, and try to just create just a better private investing experience.
What are you seeing as the major challenges that CFOs have got these days? Are they do you see that this is really, really one of the top things on their agenda that they need help with?
I think if we asked 1,000 CFOs, they would probably, say it's really, I need more time in my day. And I think about what that looks like. What is that? These are finance professionals, and they're exceptionally good at what they do. And they've been chosen to be the public face of that team, which is fantastic. It's a huge accomplishment to be in the C-suite in that role. One of the things I think that slows up that process is around this investor relations. So it might not seem as the most pressing and dire need, but these are exceptionally smart people who have reached a great deal of success in their career. And the things that they might trip up on are where I see us filling that unmet need. So it might not be obvious that investor relations would be the first thing a CFO needs to be worried about, but we see it as a huge unmet need in terms of innovative software that can solve some of these problems that they can continue to rely on, as opposed to be kind of left in the dark to figure everything out on day one.
Yeah. So there are some interesting new happenings around NASDAQ requirements and things like that. So where do you think things are going in that direction?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting push, probably necessary to implement as soon as possible. I think that diversity requirement for NASDAQ is at least going to have every single board of public companies ask themselves a really hard question, which is, have we done enough? Or are we currently doing enough? I think most public companies want to give their investors the update that they're trying to be as diverse as humanly possible, while also being equitable. But I think this is a good opportunity for all public companies to take a very hard look in the mirror to ask what's missing in their organizations. And we know just from statistics that diversity and inclusion efforts have fallen short. So it's kind of a good opportunity to refocus energy in a productive way, but it also demands a new spectrum of communication. When you're communicating across a diverse group of people, there's an added element of sophistication and nuance that's important to not just speak to a diverse crowd, but engage them. And I think software like NthRound supports that in a way that's really important. So when we design any of the custom things that we do for individual clients, we have some very important pillars and hallmarks. For example, if you were to send out an investor update, or if you didn't have a platform like ours in place and were to send out an investor update, there's a chance that you have an individual personal bias. If an individual investor were to pick up the phone and call you, you may say something that would be, maybe just, again, it could be something like tone of your voice. It just opens yourself up to liability. That's a lot of pressure. So by putting in a platform like ours, at a click of a button, you're giving equal information to all stakeholders in the same exact fashion, where everyone has equal access. So it's not just how you're saying it or what you're doing. It's can we upgrade a system to make this whole process a little bit easier and also mitigate risk at the same time, which I think would resonate.
That's a really interesting one, Andrew. A few podcasts ago on the Grow CFO show, we interviewed a chap called David B. Horn. David's one of those rare CFOs that's actually written a book, Add Then Multiply. David's been involved in several occasions in the transaction space that we're talking about. He's been involved in floating businesses, getting investors for businesses, buying businesses, and indeed selling them. One of his passions at the moment is all about that minority, let's say, inequity when it comes to raising finance. That some research that he got involved in showed that for every dollar of private equity raised, only 1 cent went to an all-female pitch team. And David has a passion about education and minority interest in education and equality of females. So he's actually come out with a real want to do something about that. I'm really pleased to see your software is kind of leveling the playing field here. But we talked about that in the podcast, and we put a lot of it down simply to cognitive bias. You know, you look for people, the equity house looks for people like themselves. You as the CFO, probably that you're constantly thinking of communicating to yourself. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I think that that's exactly right. It's one of those things that you think about in terms of where can I find somebody who has been through this process, right? So the hiring of a CFO may come pre-IPO, and that is maybe the most important event of a company's entire financial history. That opportunity for liquidity and to open up the investor pool to the public and let everyone have access to that. Those shares. But at the same time, kind of the iteration of that thought is if only one demographic has ever done it successfully, you will continue to rely on that demographic. If you don't support and promote other people to have the opportunity to be successful at it, you're going to likely end up just repeating what you know would work, again, to mitigate risk. So I think that there are a ton of tools right now, and I'm very excited that the SEC here is sort of broadening the potential investor pool in terms of accreditation standards. So we're really redesigning the entire private markets right now. And I think using really, really advanced software to help mitigate some of that risk around private investments, which are inherently risky, is really a first step in molding that infrastructure. So I think that if we do this really purposefully, we're going to be able to create a far more equitable environment for the financing of innovation, which is really what we rely on. So that's very exciting to me.
Yeah, and that cognitive bias, and I even see it in myself. And one of my regular weekly tasks in Grow CFO is to write the weekly newsletter. Normally, I write it. So the last few weeks, I've written on a Sunday evening with a schedule set to go out about 8:30 Monday morning. And I do find myself looking back on this and suddenly realizing, oh, Kevin, you've written this for another male CFO. Go back, take out all the references to he or him or whatever, and realize that probably 40 to 45% of the people that are reading this weekly newsletter are female. Yep.
That's a really good point. I mean, that's a great practice. I think that in itself will continue to help foster the Grow CFO network. I was actually thinking about this. I know that you've recently launched a toolkit to try to help people understand what they are kind of working on. As a leadership position, I think that has some requirement to be self-reflective. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, and you asked me the question just before we went on air. If you could give your CFO any present that you wanted for Christmas, what would it be? And actually, we've got a very early version of what we're calling our CFO readiness toolkit out within the Future CFO program. The toolkit identifies what we look at as the 10 core competencies of the CFO. And it allows you to go in and rank yourself and give you an idea of which areas you're really good at, which ones you need to develop. And some of it in the future CFO situation, you probably haven't fully at this stage got your head around everything that a CFO needs to do. As you said earlier, I think your words were the CFO is the public face of finance. Well, typically your future CFO is still doing the the head of finance, VP finance, financial controller type role, and very much looking internally, very senior position, running finance, but running finance internally. The difference once you go to the C-suite is you're the right-hand man of the CEO or the right-hand woman of the CEO, and you're very much looking outwards. Now, that requires a whole load of new skills. So the readiness toolkit effectively says, hey, here are all the things that you might need. What sort of experience have you had up to now in doing these things? Where do you think you're going to need to develop yourself to say that you're ready for that role? And we know we can't be great at everything. So the Christmas present that I want to give CFOs is version 2 of that toolkit, which we're actually developing at the moment, is going to be much more detailed in how it does the assessment. It's going to allow you to say, well, okay, if these we're going to break each of the 10 competencies down to lots of sub areas. We're going to say against each, well, hang on, what's my level of experience? Is it none at all? Is it basic? Is it intermediate? Is it advanced? But actually, let's put another layer on top of that, because one of those key competencies we look at is that whole area of the transaction, the managing investors, the going to markets, the buying and selling of businesses. Well, actually, some CFOs have an entire career and never, ever need to get anywhere near a transaction. So just because you might not have any experience of that, you might consider yourself weak at that, doesn't mean it's the first thing you need to learn. So it's balancing in that kind of spotting the pros and cons, spotting the gaps in your current skill base, but also looking at what's nearest the top of the pile that you need to learn about in the next 12 months, getting those two together. And we're also saying, well, we can't treat CFOs as just numbers in here. We've got to look at a certain amount that people come along with strengths and weaknesses. And you can be weak in something, and part of it is recognizing you're weak and maybe getting somebody else to help you rather than learn the skills yourself. Because I always believe that a weakness, if you put that on your development plan, well, the best you can go is from being weak. Maybe you might get to mediocre if you're lucky. Well, I really do. If you're just mediocre, you might as well get somebody else who's very good at it to do it for you. The CFO cannot be good at everything. But if you've got a few strengths, then strengths are the sort of thing you can take to mastery. So why not put your personal development into stuff that you are good at and become better at it? And that becomes your kind of specialism. I think that's a far more sensible way of approaching things, especially since things that you're strong in, things that you're good in, tend to be the things that you enjoy doing as well. Let's face it, if you don't come to work to enjoy it and to have a bit of fun, then it's a boring old world. So that would be my Christmas present to the CFO. And I know you've got some thoughts on what NthRound would do as a Christmas present to the CFO.
Yeah, we have a few running internal jokes, and our team has many of those. We're all professional, coming from the finance world and technology world. So we are sending out Gap T-shirts, and Gap obviously with an additional A, but styled very similarly, but not too similarly to so the
Gap as in the clothing brand.
Right.
Yes.
But it says, I know Gap and I'm not afraid to use it. So we'll be sending some of those out, and I'm very excited to send one across the pond to you, Kevin. Just to kind of summarize all of that, I think what we're kind of realizing here is that the traditional route to becoming CFO almost has a direct switch to trying to then be in a leadership position for that role. And it really values different aspects of not just skill sets, but personalities as well. So what it demands really is either a perfectly well-rounded human being, and maybe there are some of those out there, But I think what you've identified is it's very unlikely that that's going to be the case. So might as well look, again, hard in the mirror, recognize the leadership position that you're in, fill the needs with people who love to do what you lack in, which takes a great deal of humility. But that's what the leadership role requires now. And I don't think that we've even really touched on the fact that technology is changing so rapidly as well. So outside of, again, it feels like we're creating this master list of proficiencies that most people have a career in one in. And we're saying that a CFO, a modern CFO of today, needs to be self-aware enough to understand their strengths and weaknesses in a way that they can hire effectively to fill those needs, or learn about, whether or not they have a passion in self-improvement in that way. They have to be technology experts. They have to understand financial engineering. They have to be very strategic and understand, like you said, some CFOs never go near transactions. Others need to do M&A strategy, which again is a full another skill set. So, to support and then to be able to communicate across all of your teams on top of all of that seems like a really big ask, and maybe not even kind of what the experience level of their, the role they had prior to becoming CFO. So I think that's all really, really interesting. And I can now sort of start to understand something that's always baffled me, is the turnover rate of CFOs. It really seems like we're almost giving an impossible task. And then if it doesn't go the way the CEO predicts, then I'm starting to understand, this is kind of filling in my personal understanding of why this is such a challenging endeavor.
Yeah. And a couple of things I'd say there. And last week, I recorded a podcast for the Grow CFO show with one of our mentoring team, Catherine Clark, and we spent the whole podcast talking about imposter syndrome. And we think that nearly everybody that gets promoted to the top of their game, whether it's to the C-suite, whether it's to sort of partner level in one of the big four accounting firms, so on, they get to a point that they kind of think, what am I doing here? I haven't got all the skills and the talents that are needed for this role. I'm going to get found out at some point. And they get this feeling of inadequacy. It manifests itself in lack of confidence sometimes. It can manifest itself in procrastination around a decision because you're not sure about all the facts. And what we're saying is actually that's perfectly normal. And the first thing you've got to do with imposter syndrome is actually admit that you've got it. And that's a very hard thing to do. But once you've made that admission, then you can start to do something about it. And put that imposter syndrome into the CFO role in particular. I think it can apply right across the C-suite. But the CFO suddenly has to be the man who understands business strategy. He's got to be the man that understands the finance numbers. That's probably easy because he's done that all his time. But he's got to be able to communicate. He's got to know about investor relationships. Most CFOs these days are being pushed in the technology direction. Take this conversation we're having today about NthRound. I've been around finance technology in a consulting role for many, many years. And I had no idea that this anything existed in the space that we've been talking about today. How's the average CFO supposed to know about that? How is he supposed to know even about the latest developments in accounting software? What should he go out and look for when he's selecting a new finance system? He's the man at the top of the pile with the job of implementing that system. That means he's got to know an awful lot about business change. No, he can't possibly know all of these things. So I think in the CFO role, the potential to have imposter syndrome is probably doubled over any other role in the C-suite. One of the things in Grow CFO that we passionately believe in is the role of a mentor. I think CFOs as well feel as though they should know it all and probably think, oh, if I have a mentor, it's a sign of weakness. But actually, again, it's recognizing that you can't possibly know everything. And quite often you end up, particularly in that smaller company, probably the sort that you're describing, where you've got a few investors, they're bought in, you've probably got a finance team around you, but you may well be the only qualified accountant. You don't have a peer group that you can turn to easily for advice to bounce an idea around. One thing I loved about consulting was that we always had a consulting team of fellow reasonably senior people. We had a problem around a project. Well, let's go have a beer and work out what we're going to do about this. I don't see the CFO having the same kind of peer group. So why not have a mentor who we believe should be a CFO that's been there, done it before, got the T-shirt, that you can talk to, that you can say, well, actually, and Catherine, who I interviewed on the podcast, one of our mentoring teams, Catherine, I've got this problem. Do you ever come across anything like that? And she might say, well, not exactly, but we had this situation and here's what we did in that one. It worked a bit, but it would have been better if we'd done. And you just start kicking the idea around and you've got somebody else independent from your organization that can give you a good view of things.
Right.
That's the way things are going for the CFO. And I think having that mentor, if you can manage to do it, and personally, I believe that the company should be paying for that out of your personal development budget. That's the way things should go.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think that's a brilliant way to not only solve some of the feelings of imposter syndrome, but also it addresses something I hear all of the time when I talk to prospects or existing clients. They say, you just took a process that we did manually and I just saved 3 days. You know, you're doing the exact same thing. You're distilling these lessons into really digestible, easy to access narratives that are incredibly relevant. But we're talking about things that are lesson oriented, that even if you had the time to go find out for yourself and read and Google search every possible thing you could on the subject, you could still fall short. So being what Grow CFO does that I think is so incredible is that that mentorship program, being able to call upon somebody else and ask if they've seen something similar, even just to give yourself more resources. But I love that. That's some of the best feedback I hear from clients. That's one that makes me really excited. Is you just saved me days. I'm great at what I do, but distributing all of this is one of the hardest parts of going into the end of the year. So I think that we're basically doing a lot of the same work and trying to just distill these lessons into practical tools and provide resources to kind of an underserved network of people who are being challenged in a lot of ways, whether it's rate of technology change, driving a culture of inclusion. So all these are incredible leadership capacities, but you'd have to be a superhero to get all of this done independently.
Yeah, and the time thing is an interesting one, because I really do see the CFO being pulled in two directions, and it's looking after all of those internal things in finance that traditionally do take an awful lot of elapsed time. There's those statements going out to investors. There's the repeated budget rounds of reviewing numbers and things like that. There's the closeout at the year end and putting together those financial statements. And we're seeing more and more, certainly across in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the United States, is the need to put together big annual reports that cover lots of things around sustainability and ethnicity, diversity policies and things like that are a million miles away from finance. But because the annual report, the CFO gets dragged into all of that stuff. And frankly, the time pull on the CFO away from some of the other externally facing stuff that he should be doing is quite considerable. So any tools that we can find that may allow him to drag a day, 2 days, 3 days of his month back have to be pluses.
Yeah, that's how we feel. Obviously a bit biased in terms of how we go about doing that in creating easier ways to communicate with shareholders, especially around such sensitive reporting. But I think that it continues to just, like, this isn't a trend that's going to reverse anytime soon. We're going to continue to have more and more strain on this position. And I don't see that rate slowing down. I see the technology that CFOs need to be aware of as more complicated. Just kind of something that's fun about one of our trading environments is that for small transactions, we built what's called the decentralized application based on blockchain technology. So if you want to trade private company stock internally amongst shareholders in small quantities, we created a tool to do so. And it looks like a bulletin board of bids and asks, but it's another opportunity for a CFO to say, I'm on the cutting edge. I understand how we could deploy a blockchain-based application moving forward into 2021 if that was of interest to us or our shareholders, or if it solved a liquidity need for an individual. So it's almost as if risk mitigation outside of traditional finances also now includes having a really solid hold on cutting edge technology, a really great hold on driving diverse culture. So, I mean, it's not just time back into your day. It's gives them a fighting chance to even maybe just address all the things that we've covered so far. In all of the podcasts you've done so far with the number of really interesting guests, what's been one of the more shocking pieces of information that you've received? I think imposter syndrome is probably a little shocking, but then once you think about it, less surprising. But have there been any just things that have changed in the role that you see that's now?
Yeah, one of the podcasts we put out early on, we put together in the early days of Growth CFO, right at the beginning of 2020, we took the embryonic member base and we surveyed these guys around finance systems. It was kind of, what do you use? What do you think of it? Would you recommend it? What are your plans going out over the next 3 to 5 years around replacing the system and so on? And I think the surprise that we got was, in certain cases, the lack of knowledge of the systems that people are using. We were right at the start of lockdown, so people were suddenly learning how to work remotely. That gave some people a shock because they realized then how the really old-fashioned systems that they thought were still going to work for them just didn't work remotely. Mm-hmm. But then there was this idea that we asked a specific question: is do you use a cloud accounting system? Now, they'd named the system, and they then said, is it cloud or not? The number of people that thought they had a cloud accounting system when they didn't. Now, cloud to me is something like Xero. It sits on a server that Xero own, that's up there in the ether. You can sign into it from anywhere using a browser. It's available 24/7, whatever. Whereas some people had what was effectively an on-premise accounting system still, but you could get into it remotely. The perception that kind of old technology was being thought of by a lot of CFOs as cloud when it's not. That came as quite a shock to us, that people's realization of what they're using. A lot of people not realizing the art of the possible with modern software. So I think that survey gave us a few surprises.
I've got to say, I think I love I haven't heard that before, the art of the possibilities.
Yeah.
I love that because it forces you to have almost an internal audit of your back office software. And really a lot of software that ends up getting purchased either by leadership or by somebody who recommends a system internally, they say this solves a problem, right? This solves an immediate need that we have right now. That could be an accounting software, planning software, pretty typical. And I think that the lack of understanding in technology just goes to show that there are a lot of softwares out there that are a little less malleable and pretty static. So something that we kind of pride ourselves on is really we give you a really interesting way to kind of custom build what solutions you need to use. What's obviously pressing that needs to be solved right now, whether that's simple equity or investment management, or we have a number of real estate clients that use our software to design around individual buildings. So it's really interesting that you can recognize that there's clearly a discrepancy between existing tools and tools that were relied on at the beginning of the pandemic, but also that the new suite of tools available today, you can continue to build off of and innovate on and create, unique design that's oriented to you and your situation, which sounds really pertinent to the CFO to kind of wrap back to the idea that there are some CFOs that will never see a transaction, right? So we know that there are very, very unique experiences. So to have software that's malleable and configurable in a way that's unique to you and your situation, I think that's more pressing now than ever because those tools are readily available. So it's a huge need, and the thing is, it's hard work to address an entire back office, and sometimes these are complicated situations that the CFO is inheriting and didn't start with. So to be able to bring modern solutions into kind of antiquated processes is it's a huge challenge. So not knowing where to start, again, huge value to grow CFO, saying that there's a big technology component these days.
Yeah, and I seriously think the future is systems that are extensible. They can grow with you. They've got the basics, but they've also got absolutely great APIs that mean that you can plug in other tools as you need them as you grow. I think the days of the almost traditional ERP system, and I've always been a hater of SAP. I've spent a career avoiding SAP implementation projects. I'm just about done.
We won't ask them for a podcast sponsorship anytime soon. How's that?
Not anytime soon. But I've always regarded as concrete wellies for the corporate organization.
That's brilliant. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's very much you need systems that are modern, flexible, and can play together.
Right. Nobody's trying to steal Excel from you, but you do need to be able to update reports in a way that doesn't look like you're just designing macros, right? You need to be able to distill and share information easily. I think play well together is actually more powerful than integrate. I think about tools that integrate, and I think that the term integration might be overused. I think that sometimes when people discuss software that integrates with one another, they really mean there's a manual process and it just happens to, you can just dump the things that you did in one system over into another, and it then appears there. What we try to do as designers and software engineers is create tools that play really nicely. So we understand that Excel isn't going anywhere. You might have 10 sheets open. That's fine. That's what the tool is built for. The power of ledgers is great. But at the same time, we also have things that are augmentative. So we have, worksheets and, internal tools that you'd be easily able to just tap into when it made sense to do that. So I think play together is the perfect way to put that. I think it's an important distinction.
Talking of Excel, that was another little shock that we got out of the finance system survey. It's not unusual for a brand new company to start off and they just keep the accounts on an Excel spreadsheet. Right. But the number of companies that we found out that had kept going that way and never quite flipped over to buying themselves some proper accounting software. That surprised us. It was more than we imagined.
Yeah. We've got a really interesting, now that I think about it, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think Grow CFO is going to continue to expand in 2021. I'm really excited to see how the toolkit comes back, how people use that, and get to understand where their strengths and weaknesses are. I was thinking about this in terms of where I sort of see markets merging and a little bit back towards the NASDAQ conversation as well. I think that NthRound has a very good chance of also becoming a source of truth when it comes to using tools like a Bloomberg terminal. The private company data world is pretty saturated. It's got a few big data providers, but the information that we're capturing is so valuable. It's everything. And then to have a single screenshot of all of it, but it also relies on incredibly sophisticated security. So I think in the future where private markets are a little bit more democratized, NthRound could be a really powerful tool for CFOs. And then I think the fundraising and trading worlds are going to be colliding in a really unique way. So I think we're kind of positioned nicely to be a CFO's favorite. If we're saving time and energy, I think that adoption could be really powerful. but that's maybe another year away. But it seems to resonate really heavily with this network right now, and we're really excited to explore if that's kind of where we're going to sit in the conversation.
But Andrew, that probably brings us right back to what would the really valuable Christmas present be to the CFO? I think it'd be a crystal ball, because to see all that lot and how it's going to play out, you're really guessing a little bit. What's the future going to hold? What are the things out there? There's bound to be some stuff out there that we haven't even thought about. You can only base what you think the future is going to be on what you're seeing now, and new stuff is coming on at an increasingly fast rate. And then 2020, what would we all have done this year if at this point last year we'd had a crystal ball that told us we were going to have COVID?
I think I'd be in Barbados, Turks and Caicos, or no, but I think that's right. I think that the planning aspect and the strategy is all based on what we have right now in front of us, because that's what our basis of all of our planning is going to be around. And again, I think that the worst situation is when an individual is looking for information and they go to reach out to the CFO, and the CFO either knows the answer or doesn't know the answer, and they're in a position where it's just high stress on an additionally high stress environment. So I just think that when that communication breakdown occurs, we can put things in place now that are going to update how we can communicate more effectively. And it kind of feels like what we've surmised is that almost all of the communications, all of the work that the CFO does is critical. Not just these are not conversations that can go in any direction. They have to be precise. The models have to be accurate, and then on top of all of that, the communication has to be flawless. So I think you're right. I think a crystal ball is a better gift than a t-shirt. I think maybe if we do really well in 2021, we'll look at going back to our VC and asking if we can invest in some sort of AI that will give us a better chance of scenario modeling out the rest of the...
there you are. There's the thing that we haven't even started understanding what the potential is. AI. Where does that take us? And we're going into science fiction, but it's going to be on top of us in 3 to 5 years, and maybe even faster.
Yeah, and these tools are, the thing about it as well is the process of seeking out a solution, a potential solution. If you haven't addressed the problem in a way, even with an outdated system, it's going to be far more difficult to implement just a variety of innovative technologies. If you don't have, like we said earlier, things that play well together, tools that play well together, it's going to be very difficult to upend your entire back office overnight when the next best thing comes out. So it is a work in progress to get buy-in from your team to use certain tools, to give the CFO the confidence that when they use a tool that it's going to operate the exact way that they'd like. But I think it's a process. I don't think that one of the science fiction things that I think that we don't really think about is it's all the time. It's happening every single day. It's not tomorrow we're not going to wake up, and have access to fly to Mars, but we've been, flying Elon Musk has been sending rockets and having them come right back and land. And, we don't really think about how it's all around us all the time. So I think kind of integrating and updating is a constant effort that's really, really going to help make that switch when it's, more available for more futuristic kind of applications.
Yeah. And I'm probably one of the very last generation of people that remember sitting in the accountancy office when I was qualifying to be an accountant, and we still did everything manually. And then suddenly this box arrives one day. It's an IBM PC. What do we do with one of those? Oh boy, have we learned what to do with one of those.
And I think most of the people who are qualified and becoming CFOs remember that day as well.
Yeah.
So I think that is really a perfect picture to paint when we think about updating systems and creating a better holistic environment to allow CFOs to run in 2021. And I'm really excited to help and work with you in that process. So I appreciate it.
I think that's probably a great place to wind things up. Andrew, that has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I I can't wait for things to return to normal and be able to skip across the pond, come see you sometime soon. So,
absolutely. We must do that. Right. Thank you.